This podcast is recorded on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam peoples.
British Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me you're not a stranger, you'll always be a friend.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicos. Today is February 26, 2025.
I'm Scott Lundeboom.
And I'm Ian Bushfield. Thanks to our partners for being accommodating in moving our schedule forward. I actually had to move it because of commitments of my partner, but yours was accommodating, thankfully, at the last minute.
Yeah, because I blanked on that. We moved it around today, but thankfully she was really accommodating. Sweet about the last minute. Oh shit, I try to record this.
Here's to having nothing to do on a Wednesday night. I'm glad we freed up your Thursday for you. We do have things to talk about, though, even though we're a day early. The legislature here in BC is heating up, and we are seeing cracks in the Conservative coalition as they go into their AGM this weekend. Federally, the leadership contest for the next prime minister saw the debates, both in French and English, and you managed to watch one of them. Thankfully, I did not get to see either.
Yeah, watched the English one last time. Fortunately, my French not quite good enough to follow along with the French one. Nor did I have the time on Monday to watch the translated one. But from the sounds of it, not much happened on that one other than a slightly embarrassing misspeak that we'll get to when we look at those.
Yeah, so jump over to patreon.com/politicos, get in the Slack channel, and when there are debates like that, there's a nice little live thread where people have their instant reactions you can follow along at home with. Let's start here in BC. I think the first thing I'm eager to talk about is how things are not going well in the BC Conservative Party, as this was the week of outbursts. It feels like that last week of the election again, Scott, where instead of all of the stuff being dug up from the past and just dropped day after day, it's just new comments day after day from sitting MLAs and other members of the party, embarrassing them and getting called out by the NDP. Obviously, they'll call out that as they are wont to do, but even by members of their own party saying, hey, this is terrible, it should be retracted. And then they go, no. And then John Rustad goes, maybe you should retract that. And they go, no. He goes, okay. And that's the state of their party.
It's a tough group to keep together.
Rustad says it's as a family, you have to have these issues. It sounds like he's in rough water. So let's get into a few of the specifics. First up is MLA Dallas Brody. She weighed into a lawsuit that has been filed against the Law Society of BC, where it dates back to a motion a couple lawyers tried to push through the Law Society's AGM to change training materials around mandatory reconciliation modules that lawyers have to take as part of their continuing education. And they wanted to they wanted to micro edit the language of these modules through an AGM motion, which for anyone who's been in a nonprofit, that's asinine behavior. Like, the motions failed. In the end, there was a big pushback against them. But now the lawyers are saying the Law Society has defamed them for bringing forward this motion and calling them residential school denialists. And Brody is saying, coming to their defense and saying there were 0 bodies found at these residential schools, and therefore these people should not be defamed by the Law Society like that. Those are just the facts, she posted to X. This was called out by the Attorney General with the NDP. It was also called out by fellow Conservative MLA Aaliyah Warbus, who's an Indigenous woman. So that went well for them. More recently, go ahead.
Also, Rustad asked her to take the post down, didn't get taken down.
And he went, oh, well. Today as well, Brent Chapman's back in the news because it's Pink Shirt Day, and he called out the many on the left who have turned the focus of this day on LGBTQ and gender diversity. The day which he called Anti-Bullying Day, he refused to call it Pink Shirt Day, referencing how the day started because kids bullied a boy for wearing pink.
Yeah, where do you think the name came from? If there wasn't a connection there.
So he got, like, the rest of it went off about the golden rule and everything, and that was less fine. Like, it is a day that is broadly, you should be kind and not bully. That was just a more of a weird one that just happened to be today. And then, yeah, the other thing that Conservatives got caught up in is we mentioned last week, there's this new procedure for MLAs to bring forward motions or bills in an order of precedence. And the NDP's Jennifer Blatherwick, I believe, got the first motion, and she brought forward a motion condemning Donald Trump's tariffs and saying we need to stand up for BC by targeting red states. And they got to spend some time debating that in the Legislative Assembly. Real, well, it was a trap, right? And had 5 MLAs fell for it.
Yeah, the motion was never. Yeah, the motion wasn't going to do anything directly. Like, that's all government policy. It's not going to be done by a private member's motion. Nevertheless, it's the world's most obvious political trap that 5 MLAs blithely walked into.
So, in addition to Dallas Brody again and Brent Chapman again, you also had Tara Armstrong, Jordan Keeley, and Heather Maws voting against this. 1 or 2 of them said they didn't like the red state section. Others, I didn't see what their specific answers were. The motion, passed 86-5, and the Conservatives kind of acknowledged this. We allow free votes in our party. And on this one, I'm not like, hey, these 5 should be expelled over this. It's just kind of embarrassing for them.
Well, it also means the NDP gets to run with look at these Conservatives voting in favor of Donald Trump.
Yeah, and they did.
And get to hammer them. Yeah, so it's, just politically unwise, and they just failed to recognize the obvious trap and are going to take a bunch of heat for it, which just goes to show that very few of the Conservative caucus are people with previous political experience as electeds, and it shows sometimes.
And it also shows kind of the weakness of John Rustad's position as leader. He's got to navigate this, and he's clearly not able to keep control. Previous BC Liberal governments, or even when they were opposition, had instances where they knew MLAs were not going to vote in a way that was going to look good. So those MLAs just didn't show up to vote that day. And they were just conveniently absent. This happened a few times with like Rich Coleman and Laurie Thronis. I know on a few particular motions where the party decided they were going to go one way and had the others go against, or just be absent and miss the vote. I don't think this one rose to that level, but like being able to deal with the residential school denialism borderline posts or that kind of stuff. Like, I get that John Rustad's in this position where he was kicked out of his party for stuff he kept posting onto social media, and so he's probably a bit hesitant to do it to people in his own caucus. But at some point, there's a line, right? Like, everyone has a line. If your MLAs are posting Nazi swastikas, you're going to have to kick them out. We're not there yet, thankfully, but I don't know.
Well, even just beyond that, politics is a team sport. They're all trying to, in theory, should be moving together to advance the Conservative Party's political prospects so they can eventually win an election and take and exercise power to enact their preferred policy and agenda. And you don't get to do that if you're going off everybody in their own direction and not making collectively strategically wise choices on how you spend your time. Because, this week the party got to take all their attention and energy and direct it inward dealing with all that rather than take the momentum they got out of the last couple of weeks of the NDP's reversals and bad leaked documents and keep hammering on that.
So yeah, there is a AGM for the party happening this weekend. There's no formal mechanism in that meeting to remove, there's not a leadership vote over Rustad. But if there was enough discontent among the membership, they could change the rules at it. I don't know if they need to bring an advance motion for that, though, but I don't know their rules of procedure deep enough. But they can at least start to make things bad for him if they elect a board that is hostile to the direction he is going, which I'm not even clear what direction he personally is trying to take it. We've seen a couple people start to call publicly for his resignation, including board member Paul Rochford, who I don't want to say more about him. Brian...
It's, I think, more aligned with the Dallas.
Oh, very much, yeah. Very much. Brian Breguet, who ran in Vancouver Langara, has also said, he got us from 2% to 40%, but it's time for a leadership race to determine our next direction. And actually, that's not a bad argument. Figure out what you're doing, because right now there's so much tension that if he's not a strong leader at this point, even if he just ran against, it's a new party than it was before the election, there's a good argument for the race.
Yeah, you see that in a lot of stuff. Startup, sometimes the person that takes it from, zero to being a growing business isn't the person to grow it to the next phase and the next level of scale. And that happens. And I'm not sure Rustad necessarily has the political chops to manage a caucus and take it to the next level. And that's fair. Guy did a lot of work to get things to that point, but it was also a lot of effectively leveraging the situation, but it was also taking the situation, and that did a lot of the work to bring things forward as the Liberal Party was falling apart on that. And there was a fair bit of skill in executing the moves that had the Conservatives eclipse them, but it's not clear that in a different scenario there's going to be as easy a path to get that next 10%.
Yeah, founder syndrome can be a real bitch. In the legislature, though, Rustad delivered on one of his key promises, which was to vote non-confidence as soon as he could with the NDP.
Why?
He amazingly introduced a motion to amend the throne speech to say this House does not have confidence in the government. The throne speech itself being a confidence motion, he just wanted to expedite the process. And that motion obviously failed today, but he at least got to say, promises made, promises kept. I tried, guys. It was...
But why even bother? The only poll we've got has them behind. Besides, they don't have the votes for it, and what advantage do they get to go into an election right now? If anything, the general vibe is way less anti-incumbent than it was 6 months ago. Just there's a rally around the flight to fat happening, and the ground is now much less favorable for any opposition party. As the Ontario Liberals and NDP are finding out.
His base wanted him to oppose, and he did. Honestly, I think he knew it was going to fail, and that's why he was probably more confident bringing it forward. He's like, then I can say I did it. It didn't work, but sorry guys, I'm trying. I'm doing he's trying to take the page from the federal Conservatives 6 months ago of introduce as many non-confidence votes as you can, even if they're all going to fail, just so you can. Although at least federally,
there was a minority parliament,
the math
and
could have worked.
The Conservatives yeah, would have had a landslide victory if the polls held.
Yeah, but the opposition shouldn't only introduce non-confidence votes when they're going to win. They should introduce them when they have an argument to do it. And I guess I'll do it as soon as I can. Is a, I don't know, whatever.
I don't know. Like at least hang it on something that's in the window right now and is something that the government is clearly offside on.
It is actually fun.
Of the, yeah, like if I had to draft a non-confidence vote, I don't know, I'd probably put the stuff around the safe supply diversion, like hang it around that, because that's something government has in a bad position on. Looks like they've been hiding what they knew and when on that, and like that's something to at least hit them with. They're just the general, we don't have confidence, and general list of bad things. That's not enough. You need specific for the
I'll give them credit for procedural ingenuity. Honestly, the NDP and Greens in 2017 could have ended Clark's government like 4 days sooner had they done this. Not that it made any difference, right? But instead they had to debate that clone speech for a few days, but they could have gotten us to a coalition or the confidence and supply agreement government a little bit sooner if they knew that they could amend the throne speech to say it has no confidence. Anyway, on the government side, the government did introduce one more bill this week, a set of amendments to the Business Practices and Consumer Protection Act. These are promised changes to improve consumer protections, specifically going after predatory sales practices and just making contracts a little bit more clear for people.
Well, also prevent contractual terms that remove the ability to participate in class action lawsuits or require private arbitration, which both seem solid changes.
Yeah, these all seem like good modernizations. A lot of it is around door-to-door sales for like heat pumps and stuff, and just making sure that people are protected. You just can't buy an air conditioner from the person who like pressures you off the street. Giving a few more notices of subscription renewals or big changes to your contracts. So nothing like radical in here, and just things that are worth updating.
I'm curious how effective the subscription renewals thing. Like, I'm actually curious if a bunch of non-Canadian tech companies are going to bother changing their terms of service or how they put forward notifications and stuff on that type of thing.
I think the online tech companies aren't as bad as like domestic phone companies often have been. And that's
maybe,
where they
I don't know.
really
There's a lot
you,
of tech
so.
products out there. The Ets as subscription models that are kind of a little sketchy.
Yeah, don't give money to X, obviously. But yeah.
No, I wasn't talking about Ets isn't a general stand-in for thing as a subscription business model.
Anyway, so far we haven't seen a lot from this government, whether from these bills. These are fine bills, all three of them. But yeah, still waiting for the substantive legislation to come. At least we get the budget in the next week or two. I think it's next week. So looking forward to that.
Next week. Tuesday.
The other thing the government has been talking about recently and more trying to explain is why the agreement that they announced with the Shishela Nation that was announced on January 29th was actually signed back in August. And that's quite a few months to delay between like making an agreement between nations and actually telling everyone about it.
Yeah, including, telling the legislature that they are as a government in theory accountable to, and also, the voters that will then be deciding who gets to form that legislature that they are accountable to. So yeah, not great on the whole transparency thing or accountability aspect on this. Even if the deal itself is fine, how they've gone about it is sketchy and not great.
Yeah. The official argument the government is making is after reaching the agreement, they wanted to take the time to come to a dissemination plan with the nation where both sides agreed, like, here's how we will tell everyone about this. And they hadn't quite figured that out. And then the writs were issued, government goes into caretaker mode, and they can't actually do any announcements or even really plan announcements until after the election. Things were a little uncertain, as we recall, for a few weeks after the election. And then they got back to it and picked January 29th. Which, like, just for future, when you're doing agreements, make sure you have your dissemination plan as part of the agreement and you won't run into this issue, I think.
Yeah, seems like a very obvious and easy way to solve it. Unless you're trying to hide the ball on something. And there are still parts of this that have not been made public.
Yeah. So there are a few plans to buy some additional land for the nation, and that's why they are saying they haven't released that, because they don't want to jeopardize those deals and transactions. Yeah, I'm not going to try and defend this. I think the agreement itself sounds pretty promising and a good step forward, but you don't engender broader trust this way. Even though I think it is important to make sure you have the trust of the First Nations when you're making these deals to do them in good faith, you also do need to, as a government elected by the people of British Columbia, that is a stakeholder as well.
And whose, Crown land is basically being held in trust for the BC people, too. And what happens with that. So yeah, you definitely need to be upfront and honest with British Columbians on this. They haven't entirely been on it from what we can tell based on the reporting here.
Let's jump to the federal scene then. The Liberal leadership race continues. Voting has begun. I read the CBC.
For those who've managed to figure out the whole verification thing.
Registering was easy, but yeah, the voting process is wild. I wasn't going to talk about this, and then I read the story, and it is an online vote, and I've done an online leadership vote before, and it was straightforward. In this case, after you have verified yourself with the party, you have to download the Canada Post Identity Plus app, do a verification with that. That includes, like, taking selfies, scanning your driver's license, scanning your passport to prove citizenship, and hoping all of these documents clear, and then logging back into the Liberal site with your codes to get your, like, voting code and using that. And understandably, some people are having trouble.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. You can also go to a Canada Post outlet to verify your ID, which is unique. I'm not saying it's bad. It's just not something I've ever heard of or thought of in a leadership race.
Yeah, it seems like a very high friction way to go about it. I even saw on social media a former national director of the Liberal Party complaining about how burdensome and complicated the process was. So yeah, even the insiders aren't having a super easy time with this one.
Like,
it's a mess. And yeah, they signed up a bunch of people.
I think it was about 400,000.
Numbers of people who joined was over 400,000. But with a lot of friction here, the actual voting process may be a lot, or the actual number of people who cast their votes might be a lot lower. And I don't know. We'll see when it comes the net story we'll talk about. But that's the sort of thing, if you were inclined to try and cast doubts on the outcome, you could definitely run with.
Yeah. And, like, what it ultimately points to for me, like, I think the verification is valuable, and the steps they are using are going to mean that the people who actually get through to vote, we're pretty confident are the people who should be voting. but it feels like there needs to be an easier way that is also more universal, like, because other political parties are going to run into this issue too. And I know that the other political parties have a fee of $5 to $15, and that actually does clear a lot of the spam out, but you should still be verifying people's IDs for these leadership votes.
So the leadership votes I've participated in were not online, but they did require you to include a copy of a driver's license or other ID when you were sending in your ballot. The ballot would be on some secrecy envelope, and then you'd have the ID copy outside of it. And it would just get mailed in. That worked fine on there. Doing it online, of course, has its own challenges on there. You do need to make sure it's secure, but the offline paper method actually just works fine for these.
I am actually trying to remember how the NDP's 2017 leadership worked.
It was an online vote, from what I remember.
But I don't remember the specific process because I'm pretty confident I voted in that one. But this is another thing with when we're talking about foreign interference and ways to protect our democracy. Here's a place where I'm like, you know what? Elections Canada might just have a role in making sure all of these are done well and equitable, but also accessible. Beyond just like, well, if you're having troubles, go to Canada Post, vote for the Liberal leader. Yeah.
Well, also, the leadership races you and I voted, I'm pretty sure every single one of them was for someone who'd be an opposition leader when they won. This one here is going to be prime minister, and that, of course, raises the stakes on all of that. And I did hear quite a few anecdotal reports on social media, so take them with what they will, about people who are signing up their dogs or picking random dead celebrities, world leaders, etc., to sign up because of their it's been a long-standing concern about the Liberals' no-cost membership system and how potentially rife for abuse it is. So there's probably quite a few of those who ended up padding out some of that 400,000 plus number. But it does also mean you have to do a lot of verification work.
Yeah, I really pity the phone line workers for the Liberal leadership race who are doing the help desk for this whole process. It sounds like a nightmare. But among those 400,000, allegedly 100,000 were signed up by Ruby Dalla. At least she has claimed in her statement responding to the fact she was kicked out of the race. This kind of broke as we were discussing last week. The party was posing 27 questions to her and going to rule on whether she would continue. And between the time we recorded and published, she was out of the race after, quote, extremely serious violations of the party leadership rules and possibly the Elections Act, according to the official statement from the Liberal Party, to which Ruby Dalla says it's all lies and slander. So yeah.
Not great. Interestingly, the timing on this was right after the final payment was due for the $350,000 entrance fee.
And right before the debates.
Which seems less than ideal on there, particularly if there are bad donations in there. Now the Liberal Party's on the hook for figuring out which ones there are in there, and they probably have to return a bunch of them because they can't hold on to it. Anyway, it's a mess on there.
There's so much good in this, Scott. Officially, the Liberals Party is saying there were certain other election finance matters, non-disclosure of material facts, and inaccurate reporting for her. A source who talked to the CBC said she was accused of failing to disclose the involvement of a non-Canadian citizen in her campaign, which they allege amounts to foreign interference if it happened during an election period. And she was told about this while she was on live television.
Which is also wild.
She deserved more than that, to be fair. I'm not saying she should be in the race, but at least a phone call.
Yeah, the non-citizen one's interesting. I don't remember. remember coming across this in the Liberal Party rules, but I may not have just picked it up. But, a PR is a non-citizen. Do campaigns actually have to take note and report every single permanent resident or person on a visa living in Canada that's just volunteering, making phone calls, door knocking on that? If there's, a much higher level of involvement, that could obviously raise questions, but I don't know, if it was, if the Mark Carney campaign had someone on this, I'm not sure this would have necessarily been added into it.
So,
yeah, anyway, the election finance stuff's definitely concerning, and we'll see what comes of that. I still don't think anything's come out of the Patrick Brown stuff that got referred to Elections Canada years ago now.
Yeah, some of these take a disappointingly long time to sort through. I get they can be complicated, but given how fast elections can move, the investigations need to be fast, but also accurate. It's a very tough situation. I'm curious.
I'm also just curious why they greenlighted her in the first. She's had a bunch of controversies in the past, and this, I don't want to get a little conspiratorial on this or anything, but it does seem weird that they greenlit her and then come around later try and find reasons to
that she was allowed in and Chandra Arya wasn't.
Yeah,
is more curious.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like they never really explained why he couldn't be in, and he is a sitting MP. I'm not saying he should be, but here we are.
Everything around her campaign from start to finish has been confusing, and this is just weird, head scratching, and this is just the latest one.
Anyway, she continues to post on Instagram and X, and has held a debate with some random TikToker or Instagram Reels quasi influencer. So I'm sure we haven't heard the last of her, because she'll probably keep popping up in, I don't know, online political debates.
And particularly, she's basically at this point alleging that the party has it in for Carney and's trying to knock people out who pose a threat to that. And, if that 100,000 number is accurate, or even if there's an attrition of 100,000 people, which, leadership races fairly commonly have a lot of signups that are, day-old members who don't actually have a deep connection to the party, who then just don't don't turn out to vote for it. The campaigns only have so many tools to turn them out to vote after signing them up. So, 25% attrition rate would not be crazy on this, and then that gives ammunition to point to we would have had a different outcome if we'd been allowed to fairly compete kind of thing that I would not be surprised to see trotted out quite a bit from now until whenever Mark Carney leaves politics.
That's enough about her. Let's jump into the leadership debate. So like we said, neither of us watched the French debate. The general consensus I saw around it is Frank Baylis has the best French of these four people. And Karina Gould's pretty good too. Chrystia Freeland's okay. And Mark Carney survived it while saying things like, we support Hamas.
We agree with Hamas.
While saying things like we agree with Hamas.
Yeah, which,
accidentally.
That's, you screw up a preposition. Should have been we agree about Hamas, probably, on that, rather than with. Still, it's embarrassing. They had to do the drill, issuing a correction to my previous statement regarding the terror group, ISIL or in this case Hamas. You don't gotta hand it to them. But it's the sort of thing that can happen in a second language on there. But it does raise questions about, does Mark Carney have the French to actually be competitive in Quebec, which is, one of the foundations of any liberal government's parliamentary caucus.
At least if he doesn't, at this point, Quebec is just going to go bloc, so he can still win a plurality. Because it seems like at this point, Quebec will just go 100% bloc. Maybe a couple seats here or there. His path to a majority closes, yes.
It probably also closes out a minority at that point. So I don't think Ontario and Atlantic Canada would be enough to hold on with the Conservatives also picking up a lot of the rural seats in those places and a bunch of the suburbs.
It's something to keep an eye on. The English debate, though, big focus on Donald Trump. What were your takeaways? You did watch it.
It was kind of what you expect. There was no interesting moment. Nobody landed a knockout punch. You could kind of see the weaknesses of Chrystia Freeland not being a great extemporaneous political speaker on a bunch of stuff. Her weaknesses were definitely there. Carney, talked like he was giving a management consultant presentation to shareholders a few too many times. If you really wanted to hear about how he wanted to, catalyze stuff or, unleash the synergies or whatever, there was no shortage of those moments. Or grow the economy was basically the answer to every other question, or potentially just every question that got asked to him. That said, they all did fine for the most part. I don't think this didn't change the race at all. The Trump stuff definitely featured heavily, and there a bunch of who to do the best job to stand up to him on that stuff. The part that kind of caught my attention is there was a moment on the defense spending section where Gould really kind of went after Carney on timelines and not being aggressive enough about speeding it up quick enough, which was interesting. Not what you would normally expect from a liberal leadership debate on that stuff. Also, earlier in the day, there was reporting that the Trump administration was thinking about kicking Canada out of the Five Eyes intelligence sharing partnership, and that definitely got a feature. So Gould and a few others came out swinging for a much more well-resourced and expanded CSIS, which was interesting on there, and something we should definitely be thinking about given everything going on in the world.
Yeah, I did notice a couple stories highlighted Gould a little more than she probably had, so I think she had a good night. If you look at Google Trends, she had a slightly bigger spike than Freeland, I think, although Carney is still dominating the field.
Carney's going to win. Gould has, I think, a decent chance of beating Freeland, potentially. I mean, we'll see, but the polls still have Freeland coming up ahead of Gould, but I could see her doing better on the enthusiasm, particularly because she's clearly staked out the progressive lane of the Liberal Party on that, which she largely has to herself at this point, which I think would be a detriment in the general election, because it is the Trudeau government was great. The only problem is, we just didn't listen enough, but everything was solid on that, and so it's not really much of a change candidacy, which would definitely hurt her if she was to win. But for a voter pool that is entirely partisan liberals, it'll probably serve her well.
Yeah, it's so tough to poll, right? Because Main Street has a poll out that they say did 2,400 registered liberals, but how do you know you got a representative sample of them? How do you know they even are registered liberals besides them just saying it? And given the challenges of voting, how do you know they'll actually vote? But according to them, like, Carney is in first, but doesn't have a majority of support. Freeland's back about 8 points or so, and Gould
It's
is a
tighter
little
than I
bit
would have
behind
thought.
that. Yeah, Gould's down at like 16% to 43 and 31 for the other two, and Bayless down at like 3%. Although he has been doing better and more impressively than I kind of expected when this like random guy, no offense to him, kind of added his name to the ballot. Like, you know, I he's earned my respect for the race he's putting up. But
Yeah, he's clearly a profile raiser, but unlike a bunch of these where the person makes them, I think he's actually doing a decent job of changing his profile relative to where it would be before, rather than just someone who is in the also ran category.
yeah, so
But he will nevertheless send an also ran.
the only other thing really with the voting underway is that the candidates have all dropped their full platforms, it kind of seems, on their website. They're each arranged a little different, and some of them just seem like they're calling their platform the list of things they've said over the last few weeks, or like the various policy announcements, which fine. So we'll include links to those in the show notes. I don't think we saw too much new from Karina Gould, if anything. There was a little bit.
Yeah, she's reorganized the stuff, and now it's on, a more bullet pointed or organized by headline thing under her platform. But there wasn't any new like policy press releases on her website, so I didn't come across anything skimming through that. So doesn't look like she's put out anything this past week. Same for Freight Bayless.
No, I think Bayless has stuff on housing, immigration, and foreign policy. That's all relatively
Was that new? Okay. That some of that
Uh,
stuff might be. I thought the housing stuff at least was there
maybe.
last time we looked.
Because yeah, the last time I looked at his foreign policy stuff, it was just recognize Palestine, and now
Right, that
it's a
has
much
changed.
broader, reestablish ourselves as the leader of peace and justice, while also like jacking up the military spending. That kind of summarizes it.
Pretty much. We like international institutions, and we're going to do more on that and strengthen them. How to actually make those effective, left unsaid, but it is, other than the Civius Pacem Parabellum, he actually has it in Latin there, and then the translated one after. Other than that bit, if you want peace, prepare for war is what it means. Other than that, it'd basically be a completely off the shelf liberal platitude on foreign policy one.
That's fine. It appeals to liberal supporters.
Nobody votes on foreign policy anyway, for the most part. That, with the possible exception of the relationship with the U.S. being the thing that is dominating both this and the upcoming election.
And that's not mentioned in his foreign policy platform, of all places. Other than you can kind of
it's
interpret
hinted
it.
at. Yeah, you can read the defense spending one in there as related to that.
But yeah,
And
we'll link to his stuff. His housing plan is fine. It's not very substantive, though. None of them are, frustratingly. So Carney does have his housing affordability plan out now. That is more than the plan to have a plan we got last week. And like all of them, it's what we're doing now plus some more. So it's unclear exactly how much, because he doesn't put dollar amounts to most of this, but it's, like, keep building how, well, does say double the pace of new home construction by unlocking private sector investment. Sure. Cutting red tape, reducing fees. The interesting thing in here, I think I saw, is expanding the Canada Housing Infrastructure Fund beyond water and wastewater to support municipalities covering infrastructure demands, which seems like a pretty good idea, especially when you tie that to all the incentives and good behaviors you want to see, like reducing fees, accelerating permitting, and so forth.
Yeah. There's there's also a thing on boosting innovation, productivity, and housing construction, which would be great if you could actually do. Construction as an industry has had pretty terrible productivity growth over the last several decades, and depending on how you look at it, can even have slightly negative productivity growth over that period. So there's a lot of space to improve that. It is also not an easy thing to do on that, and would be nice if there was some suggestions on, how.
His idea is supporting prefab and modular housing industry and new building materials. It's not nothing, but kind of going for that new tech and streamlined stuff. Like the thing, all of their housing policies, they're all kind of tied in with the same framework that the Liberals have been operating under, that the Conservatives are really in a similar vein. Like there are a limited number of toolkits at the federal level to get housing built, and it's either give money to municipalities or take money from municipalities if they don't improve permitting times, or it's just throw money back at CMHC to build them and get back into the social housing construction. Boom. And like Carney has that indirectly by helping CMHC get small and nonprofit builders low interest loans. And otherwise just kind of expanding nonprofit community housing, which is all stuff I'm like happy to see, but I don't know. I'm underwhelmed by all of it at this point. Tell me you're going to like ramp up a new national builder, and which leader had the actual idea of building a national stockpile of building materials? That was at least a new one. Is that Freeland's?
It's either her or Bayless. I think it was probably Freeland though. Might have been Gould actually. It was one of them other than Carney, which is, I know at this point doesn't really narrow things down. It was Gould, Exploring National Housing Materials Strategic Reserve on Gould's platform.
Yeah, and like I don't know if that would be that effective, but it's a different idea, so I liked that. We also got from Chrystia Freeland, speaking of
Carney dropped a more of a economic plan as well. There's a lot of text in there. It's not super deep on specifics. Some stuff about harnessing AI, some stuff about productivity, some stuff about reforming government to be more efficient and deliver more.
Are we sure this isn't the one that was... Oh no, this did come out today.
This
sounds like the one that came out last week.
It's very similar on it. It's honestly largely the same thing, kind of reworded for the most part.
Well, that's how you know he is really leveraging AI, is he can just pump his platform out by AI and it all just looks the same after a while. I'm not accusing him of actually doing that, but it gives that vibe.
Yeah, there's also the bit about in here, which I think we might have talked about last week. But if not, there's the thing on defense spending about 2%, but also wanting to spend more of that in Canada, which would basically double down on the problem we already have of trying to use defense procurement as a regional and economic development tool rather than a thing to get us tanks, airplanes, and ships, which is what we actually need.
Yeah. So finally, from Chrystia Freeland, some more details on her climate plan. She teased some of this in the past about she supports ending the carbon tax, but putting a industrial carbon tax, or at least increasing that.
And a carbon border adjustment.
Yeah, those are fine. It's what they're all basically saying to some extent. She's going to continue doing rebates for home retrofits, heat pumps, EVs, except Teslas, which, yeah, fine, whatever. Building
Working with the European unions to develop more green technology. The only interesting thing in here that's somewhat unique is the it's banned national parks and protected areas to cover 30% of Canada's land and water.
I feel like that's an existing commitment of this government. That sounds familiar. She does have free trade school. But it's the one that doesn't get
talked about much.
Yeah, that's true. It's a good thing. I support it. We're a big country. We can definitely protect 30% of our land and water easily, and still have lots to exploit. But yeah, also free trade school. Which, sure.
God, that's also been announced in the past.
Yeah, I think she has talked about that before. So the platforms are all getting a bit tiring by now, but if you are interested in what all these people stand for, it's a little bit easier to navigate now because they all have single pages for that.
Except Freeland. You have to go on her newsroom tab to pull down the list of them.
So as we barrel towards the inevitable coronation of Mark Carney, it turns out people's spirits are changing about re-election, and multiple MPs have now said that if Carney wins, they will uncancel their resignation, they will unresign, and will be running in the next election. This includes current Transport Minister Anita Anand.
Also, New Brunswick MP Wayne Long, who I think we've basically only talked about for him being one of the first MPs to go on record calling for Trudeau to step down. But yeah, CBC's reporting that Anita Anand's set to make an announcement at a Carney campaign event coming up that she will in fact be running again.
This really feels like Carney has been going around talking to caucus and saying, I need people who can do a good job if I win. Like, I don't want to win, form government, and have, like, people who don't know how government works. I would like some competent people. And Anand has a relatively good reputation, I believe. And
yeah, she's generally seen as one of the more capable get stuff done ministers. So, yeah, it was definitely a loss for the Liberals when she said she wasn't going to run again. Yeah, I'd like to see her back in cabinet, or, well, I guess she's still in cabinet, but staying on in cabinet if the Liberals form another government.
It does create a long-term question of how committed these people are to staying in government if times get tough again, but in the short term, better for him to have these people back in.
Yeah, I see why Carney would want her, but I also kind of get why, several months ago, looking at the prospect of a overwhelming Conservative victory, not wanting to spend a bunch of time in opposition when, I would count a very capable person who would probably find much more or fulfilling work as doing some other thing than basically sitting as a opposition critic, just complaining about what the Conservatives would be up to.
I mean,
it's important work. I'm not necessarily sure that opposition critic is particularly fulfilling, though.
Although she won in 2021 by 4,000 votes, so if things swung as much as they were looking like they were going to, it's possible she wouldn't be in opposition anyway. In any case, very interesting times. We've now had actually 2 or 3 polls from different companies, Ecos, Ipsos at least, show the Liberals marginally ahead in the raw ballot poll without even saying, presuming Carney is the leader. So Conservatives must be close to hitting the panic button, because I think the Liberal vote may still be slightly more efficient than the Conservatives.
Probably is.
So.
Though there's definitely a history, and not just in 93, of new leader coming in, doing pretty well in the polls, and it collapsing during the campaign. So it's going to be up in the air on whether or not this is a temporary blip or something more substantive on that, and that's something we'll only know with time. And that has been Playtoast. Find links to everything we talked about at playtoast.ca. Support the show and get access to our Slack channel at patreon.com/playtoast. Our intro music credit is Beautiful British Columbia by Sir Plotnikoff. Polite Toast is a production of Legend Boot Media, and editing services are provided by CHLY 101.7 FM in Nanaimo. Thanks for listening.